Whether it be for corn, jeans, cars, electronics, or cruise ship vacations, the market has a price where demand and supply are in equilibrium. They may not start in equilibrium, or there may be government-imposed or monopoly-imposed distortions, but over time, a competitive market will reach the equilibrium point. In this lecture, we're going to explain how supply and demand interact to determine market equilibrium prices and quantities. We'll also review the concept of efficiency, both productive and allocative efficiencies. This happens at the market equilibrium point. Finally, we're going to identify what government set prices are and how they can cause product surpluses and shortages. What is market equilibrium? The equilibrium point occurs where demand and supply curves intersect. We will review this graphically in a few slides. This is the market clearing price, where the competitive forces establish a price and where selling and buying decisions are coordinated. However, it's not technically correct to say that supply equals demand, because there could be distortions in the market that don't allow the market clearing price to function efficiently. There is just an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. At prices above this equilibrium, there is an excess quantity supplied, a surplus. We're going to see that in a little bit. At prices below the equilibrium, there is an excess quantity demanded, or a shortage. We review these graphically as part of this lecture. At the equilibrium point, economists say the markets are allocating resources efficiently, an important measure that will serve as a benchmark for analyzing distortions. What do we mean by efficient allocation? It's the right mix of resources, providing society with the right mix of goods and services. There are two measures of efficient allocation. In the first case, productive efficiency means that firms are producing goods in the least costly way by using the best or appropriate technology and the right mix of land, labor, and capital. Said differently, the inputs are efficient. Allocative efficiency means that firms are producing the right mix of goods and services that are most valued by society. The outputs are efficient for meeting the wants and needs of consumers. The market decides. There is no central planning board deciding what resources are going to be used and what will be produced.
In the previous charts, we've been talking about allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. On this particular chart, called market equilibrium, we're going to take a look at that point in a purely competitive marketplace where allocative efficiency and productive efficiency is the most efficient. There are other areas on this graph that I'm going to show you where there are inefficiencies, okay? But Suffice it to say that at the market clearing price, where the price of $3 for a bushel of corn and the quantity demanded and supplied for a bushel of corn at 7 is the market clearing price. It is the point where the quantity demanded, allocative efficiency, and the quantity supplied, productive efficiency, again, it is at its most efficient point. The market clears, the price clears the market. Let's take a look at 2 points of inefficiency, where the allocative efficiency and the productive efficiency is less than the most efficient point on this graph. The first, let's take a look at is if the market price for a bushel of corn were $4. At this particular point, consumers would demand much less than 7, and suppliers would be willing to provide much more than 7 bushels, simply because firms want to supply more the higher the price, and consumers want to demand less the higher the price. So basically at $4 you would have inefficiencies, you would have a surplus. There would be more bushels of corn produced in efficient productivity than consumers would demand. And ultimately that inventory would have to get worked down. Producers would realize, hey, we're making too much. The market isn't absorbing as much as we can provide. Let's cut that supply back, and they would come back down the supply curve and end up at the market clearing price of $3. Let's take a look at another inefficient area on this chart, and that is, let's assume that the market price for a bushel of corn is $2. In this particular case, suppliers would go, hey, $2, I'm not willing to supply that much. My costs are too high. For whatever particular reason, I'm not going to supply that. Consumers would say, oh, at $2 a gallon, or $2 for a bushel of corn, I'm going to demand this much. Okay? So basically, we would walk across here and see that there is another portion on this graph where allocative and productive efficiency is inefficient. There's a shortage. Consumers are demanding more. The inventories at the farmer's market and at the grocery stores are flying off the shelf. It's empty, etc. What's going to happen because of that demand? What will happen to supply? Suppliers will say, hey, the shelves are empty at the grocery stores. The shelves are empty at the farmer's market. We need to make more. $2 a gallon, or $2 a bushel. Consumers want more corn. And what will happen is the supply will increase, the demand will go back, and the market clearing price of $3 will give you the most efficient allocative efficiency and the most efficient productive efficiency in a purely competitive market. That's the thing to remember on this chart. It is only at the market clearing price, where demand equals supply, that resources are used most efficiently.
In the next few slides, we're going to provide examples of changes in demand and supply and how it can change the equilibrium point. For demand changes, on the left, we see the result of a change in demand with a supply curve that is constant. That is, no change in the determinants of supply other than price. Demand increases from D1 to D2. Let's assume an increase in population. What happens? Price increases, and this leads to an increase in the quantity supplied. The right-hand graph shows a decrease in demand. Let's assume that Nike shoes are no longer a fashion trend. So demand moves from D3 to D4. What happens? Price decreases and the quantity supplied decreases. Both situations have a new equilibrium point. Now, let's hold demand constant and change supply. On the left, supply increases from S1 to S2. Let's say due to an invention that lowers the cost of making smartphones with a new assembly process. What happens? Price falls, and the quantity demanded increases. On the right, supply decreases from S3 to S4. Let's assume due to a cost increase driven by an increase in energy prices. It's no longer feasible to produce certain types of rubber mats given this energy increase. Supply shifts from S3 to S4 because cost increases. What happens? Price increases to hold margin, and the quantity demand falls. In the real world, you get both demand and supply moving at the same time. We're going to take a look at one of those examples. The market does not wait to conduct the static analysis that we have just done. Remember, when supply increases, price goes down, and vice versa. When demand increases, price goes up, and vice versa. When both curves shift to the right, we can't automatically explain the ending price result. The price is indeterminate. When both supply and demand increase, as in example 3 on this chart, the resulting market price is indeterminate. We don't know the exact movement because both of these curves are shifting at the same time. The same is true in example 4, where there is a decrease in supply and a decrease in demand. Again, both of these are shifting at the same time. It will be good to review this slide in the PowerPoint deck prior to any quiz or test. However, it's always good to give a specific example where you can see both curves moving. You see the actual shifts in the demand curve and the shifts in the supply curve, and you don't have to imagine the indeterminate level of price and quantity. We'll give you an example here to show you what does happen when both of these curves move. In this particular case, it's a complex case example that has both demand and supply curves for gasoline shifting at the same time. Assume that the decrease in supply is due to higher wages at all U.S. refineries, thereby increasing the cost of providing gasoline. Supply decreases from S1 to S2. All else equal, the market price would end up at the point of the blue arrow, slightly higher than the starting point of Q1 and P1. Supply goes down, demand stays the same, price goes up. However, at the same time, the demand for gasoline increases significantly from D1 to D2. Assume that it's based upon people buying less fuel-efficient trucks, basically driving the same, getting less fuel economy, the demand for gasoline increases. It shifts from D1 to D2. What is the end result of both of the moves? Price ends up at P2, based upon the significant increase in demand that outweighs the decrease in supply. Equilibrium quantity also increases to Q2. Demand still generated a higher quantity supplied even with the shift in supply. These kinds of simultaneous shifts happen in the real world and basically more reflect real-world conditions. So rather than concluding that it's indeterminate, I wanted to give you an example where both of them move and you can see the end result depending upon the movement of the supply curve and the movement of the demand curve. To conclude the lecture, let's take a look at two conditions where market equilibrium is distorted by government intervention. In the first case, the government is interested in providing low-cost housing. So, they implement rent control and establish a price ceiling. What's a price ceiling? Well, it's where the ceiling is below the market equilibrium price, leading to a rationing problem and potential black markets. Price ceilings are also inefficient. They distort the efficient allocation of resources. Let's take a look at this graphically. The market equilibrium for rent without distortions would be $3.50 a square foot, and the quantity, QO, would be supplied. However, the government comes in and establishes a price ceiling of $3 a square foot. The legal price is now PC. What happens? Well, a shortage develops. Landlords only want to supply QS. They want to ration what is available. Renters want more at QD, leading to a potential black market situation where people with space actually rent it for more than the legal limit. Demand and supply are not in equilibrium. Price ceilings distort. The opposite happens with a price floor. Assume that the government mandates a minimum wage of $15 per hour for everybody. The price floor is above the market price of $10 an hour. We can already envision that the labor supply would be in a surplus. People may actually come out of retirement to work at $15 an hour when they would not at $10 per hour. Stay-at-home moms may elect to re-enter the workforce. Part-time work may turn into a quest for full-time employment. What could also happen is that people who are effective at $10 per hour may be viewed as unproductive at $15 an hour. The people who need the $10 per hour most may get displaced. There may be an actual quality shift out there in the marketplace due to the change in the wage. What does this look like graphically? We can see the market clearing price of $10 per hour. Quantity is QO, price is PO at $10. By setting the floor, meaning cannot go below, by setting the floor at $15 an hour, we have a labor surplus at QS. However, employers would only want QD due to the higher wage. Demand for this resource input would go down. That's the distortion. An elective reading on minimum wage is included in the elective reading section of this module.